time to take the new crew member for a sail. When you're headed out of the harbor, before you're ready to engage the system, the paddle should be locked up out of the water, and the wind vane should be disengaged. The first and most important thing to remember about sailing with wind vane self-steering is that the boat must be balanced for the system to work properly. Balance and trim are the keys to success. With that balance, you not only get efficient self-steering, but improved boat speed. Single-handed round-the-world racers like Mark Schrader rely heavily on the monitor. During a BOC race, his best 24-hour run was 244 miles and was done using only the vane to steer.
He really does a tremendous job.
The surprise to me was probably that the monitor could steer as well as it did in extremely heavy air conditions. That was the first surprise, and I'll talk about that in a second. And after I was comfortable that it could do that, then I was absolutely amazed in extremely light air. If you have a responsive helm, the monitor will steer when there are 2, 3, 4 knots of apparent wind. And that's if you've rigged things, if the boat's own steering is a relatively efficient and free system. In the heavy air conditions, I suppose the heaviest that I've ever had was in excess of 65 knots, seas of anywhere from 40 to 60, maybe 70 feet. It's very hard to estimate when they're that big. I spent a lot of time sitting in the cockpit looking up, thinking, well, maybe that one's 100 feet. Who knows? And in terms of speed, very few people probably will believe that a Valiant 47 can do 22, 23 knots, but it can, and it did that with a monitor vane steering. At one point we had a spurt to 30 knots. We were basically falling down a wave, but that wasn't sustained. 22, 23 knots on a surf is possible with the vane steering. Those are extreme conditions, and 95% of the sailors out there cruising won't have anything close to that. But it may give them some confidence to know that in the range of 2 or 3 knots to upwards of 65 or 70, if you've trimmed the boat properly, the monitor wind vane can steer it very efficiently. You can go down below and get your rest, do whatever needs to be done, and the boat's safe and you're safe.
It's important to choose the right sail combination and trim so the boat wants to stay on the chosen heading. If a wave or gust takes the boat off course, the sails should work to bring it back. Trying to steer the boat with the sails alone will ensure that the self-steering works efficiently over the widest range of conditions. On the first sail with the monitor, choose a day with a decent breeze, 10 to 15 knots. Don't over-canvas. Choose the sails that will let the boat sail along efficiently without being overpowered. Start by sailing upwind without pinching. Turn the leading edge of the wind vane into the wind and engage the pendulum lines on the wheel or tiller. Let the boat settle down with the wind vane steering even if you're not going exactly where you intended. Give the boat a few minutes to settle on a heading. Then go aft and watch how the wind vane works and how the pendulum swings, turning the boat's rudder. Once you're satisfied that the boat is sailing on course, move the wind vane leading edge downwind. Retrim the jib sheet as the vane makes the boat bear off and let the boat settle on the new course. Go through all points of sail like this until you have a good feeling for how the boat's rudder and sails work together with the wind vane. Remember, give the boat a chance to settle down on any new course. The most common mistake is making a lot of changes too fast. Although the monitor will steer a steady course without your help, it's always a good idea to have someone on watch in crowded waters. The crew aboard Segway decided to have some fun with the boat's owner, who was aboard the camera chase boat for this shot on San Francisco Bay. What about light air performance? The vane will steer the boat as long as there is some breeze and a little boat speed. Generally, if there's enough wind to produce about 1.5 to 2 knots of boat speed, the vane gear will easily steer the boat. The best light air performance is on boats with the least friction in the steering system and a good sailor balancing the boat.
Wind's about 45 to 50 degrees apparent. Quite light. Hardly enough to turn the wind generator. Been like this for about 6 or 8 hours now. Light weather vane on the monitor. Not a lot of action going on there, but just enough. Just enough to hold her exactly where she should be. Holding her course to the apparent wind. Very satisfactory.
When the wind dies, it's time to turn on the autopilot. Yes, there is a place for an autopilot. In fact, a small unit complements the monitor. In extremely light air or when motoring, a small autopilot is able to handle the boat and not use prohibitive amounts of power. When the wind picks up, engage the monitor and you're back to powerful self-steering that doesn't draw a single watt of power from the batteries. No self-steering system makes as much sense for a sailboat as one powered only by the wind and water. Because it doesn't depend on battery-powered electric motors, Windvane steering is extremely reliable and easy to use. For most serious cruising sailors, Windvane self-steering is far more than a luxury. It's an essential piece of equipment. John Neal has sailed more than 100,000 miles with a Monitor Windvane.
Yes, I am a real fan of Windvane self-steering systems because I found in storm conditions it's the pits to be stuck in the cockpit. If you're getting spray in your face, rain dripping down, salt water spray dripping down your neck, it really fatigues you. At least it fatigues me. My energy just gets zapped. I feel like someone's pulled the power cord in the battery charger, and I just find fatigue sets in a whole lot faster if I have to steer by hand. If we're glued to a wheel or to a tiller, it just takes a lot of energy. If you're sailing with only 2 or 3 people, having a self-steering vane that doesn't depend on batteries, doesn't depend on the alternator, that will steer in all conditions, or almost all conditions, I think is really critical. I don't think it's an option. I think that having a device which will take care of steering the boat really frees you up to do a lot of important things like navigating, cooking, keeping the people fed and healthy and happy. Some people talk about an autopilot as an option, and we have an autopilot on this boat, and we had one on the last boat. Really a great tool, and I wouldn't choose to sail without one, but not as a primary method. In the real heavy conditions, in the super heavy conditions, I haven't found that autopilots can consistently do the same job.
It's that kind of reliability that has made the Monitor indispensable for many of the world's best single-handed ocean racers. Over thousands of miles of non-stop sailing, even in excess of 50 knots of wind, and mountainous seas in the rough Southern Ocean, the Monitor consistently proved itself. For any sailor, whether alone or with a short-handed crew, reliable self-steering is an important and valuable asset. It allows the crew rest in rough conditions, essential for safe passages. And with the Monitor steering, there's time to carefully navigate, cook, and do repairs. All the advantages aren't practical. Sailing with the Monitor is fun and relaxing. There's a great sense of satisfaction from balancing the boat and letting the Windvane take over, often steering a more accurate course than the best helmsman. It doesn't take long for the Monitor to be thought of as a trusted member of the crew. Once you've experienced the freedom and security of sailing with the Monitor, it's hard to imagine making even the shortest passage without it.